艾就又介绍了他的朋友给我，他们住在波士顿郊区。
Well, we met, you said 9 months before we actually connected and had a date. It was sometime in late 1988 or 89, and we met in a couple of different settings that were social settings or settings where we were both doing volunteer work for the Boston AIDS Action Committee. And we just kind of met and registered one another, but didn't really go anywhere.
Well, I disagree. We were, as Don said, we were volunteering at the AIDS Action Committee, and I was in a group promoting safe sex. And Don was going to design a poster for the group. And he was brought in as the graphic designer, and he walked into the room, and I went, and I knew at that instant that Don was someone who was important to me and I wanted to go out on a date with. But I even felt there was even more than that. And actually, he was looking for some guys to be on this poster, some hot guys.
To model.
And I was not chosen. But I put my mind to it, and 9 months later, I got the graphic designer. Who needs the poster? And that's how I remember first meeting Don, but we didn't really get together, as he said, till much later, seeing each other occasionally throughout that period of time. And Don ran into me at a concert of the Boston Gay Men's Chorus, and he was with someone, and I was dating someone in the chorus. And he said, "Well, who are you here with?" And I said, "Oh, my boyfriend du jour." And he took that as a sign that, oh, well, maybe I might be available for something else, which I was. So we did have the opportunity to get to know each other a little bit over time before we really started to be serious. But even being serious took a long time. I think we worked at developing a serious relationship for about a year because you were very hesitant to get seriously involved with someone, especially someone as young as I was.
I'm 6 years older than Doug is. And that seemed like a huge difference to me at the time. I don't know why. Also, I had just come off of a relationship that was very negative and left me with a very bad feeling about relationships. That was another reason that I was hesitant about getting seriously involved. And then perhaps the biggest reason was that I was HIV positive, and I was concerned about getting involved with somebody who was not HIV positive. So there were some hurdles at first.
The final time that we met before we started going out, I was working at a firm, an architecture firm, and wondering in the back of my head where that Don Yunsen had gone. And one day he walked in the door to do some work for one of the other firms in the building. And I saw him walk in, and my heart went pitter-patter. And I wanted to get my gumption up to say something, but I was a little too shy, and so he finished his thing and he left. And I thought, oh, damn. But then I thought, oh, geez, maybe he's out in the hall, and I ran into the hall, and he wasn't there, and then I ran into the men's room, and there he was at the urinal, and so that's where we started talking to each other, was at the urinals.
So he comes up to the urinal next to me, says, "Oh, hello," as if it was a complete surprise.
And then we had lunch together.
We had lunch together, and then we arranged a date, and we met the following weekend down in Provincetown. And So that was the Provincetown connection for us. And Doug was going to be there with this group from the AIDS Action Committee promoting safe sex practices. And I was just there for fun. And we met and had dinner and had a wonderful walk out on the beach and through the tide pools, and discovered that we shared an interest in nature and wildlife and being outdoors. And that was an important discovery. And we had a nice time. That was the third weekend in August, so that's we mark that as our anniversary, third weekend.
So when did you know that you were going to stay together for a long time?
I don't think you ever really know, but I knew that I was falling in love with him, and I remember one night when we were in bed together and I told him, I think I'm falling in love with you, and that was just the right amount of indication for him. It wasn't too intense of saying I am in love with you. I showed a little bit of being unsure, but the direction where things were going. And he said something like, that's good. So, and I think it was just a progression of steps. One of the things about Don being HIV positive at that time was we didn't really know how much time there was going to be for our relationship and how much time we'd be together. And so it's hard to say at what point we knew that this was the relationship. It just evolved into the relationship. What do you think?
There wasn't any flash of lightning recognition. It was, as Doug says, a gradual unfolding for each of us. And I think we probably have different milestones. I don't remember what you just described. But one of the things that I remember was my former lover, who had moved to Los Angeles, was diagnosed with AIDS and was very sick. And he was dying. And I went out to visit once, twice, I don't know, maybe 3 times. And I was even though he and I were no longer lovers, I cared a lot about him. And I remember that Doug and I were sitting in the dining room here, and Doug, and apparently I was either on my way out or I'd just come back or something, and Sandy, it was his name, Sandy's condition was very much on my mind, and Doug started to cry, and he said he felt that my former lover was more important to me than he was. And I suddenly had this realization that I wanted to make this man happy, and I never wanted to hurt him, and I didn't want him to cry, and I knew that I wanted to be there for him and wanted to reassure him that, yes, I cared about Sandy, but that was a chapter that was closing, and this was a chapter that was beginning.
I don't remember that.
There you go. That's
a long-term relationship.
Yep.
But there are always these. But what's important is there are these moments that.
Yeah.
Even if you don't remember the same moments, but each of you remember.
It's an unfolding process, right. and I think you reach commitment at different times, and it deepens over time. I think it was years before I knew with certainty that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't something that I knew when I first saw you, but it evolved. I've never thought that looking for a partner was particularly successful. I think what works is being open to something new and what another person has to offer, and that works a lot better than hunting for a partner. But I think it's probably significant that we first met in the context of doing volunteer work for an organization that we believed in. So that right away put us in a place of having a shared value and a shared commitment to something. And that, I think that's something that I would always recommend to people who don't have a lover, a partner, somebody special in their life, and they would like that, be to go out and do something that they care about, whether that's doing volunteer work for the museum or raising funds for a nonprofit or whatever it is, because they're more likely to find people with shared interests if they're out there doing something than if they go to a bar, where you have no shared interest except maybe that you like to dance or you're looking to hook up with somebody.
Oh, that's fun too.
Yeah.
One of the moments where I knew that we were connected, physically connected to each other, was after Don had some very serious surgery. And he had gotten out of surgery, had been, from the morning until the night. And I finally got there at 10 o'clock at night. He was in the recovery room. And I was allowed to go in and see him. And I got to his bed, and he was the only one in there except for the nurse. And I said, "Donaldo?" And he didn't wake up because he was still sedated. But his blood pressure dropped 20 points. And the nurse commented to me, "Wow, his blood pressure dropped 20 points," which after surgery your blood pressure is very high, and she was taken aback by that. And I realized at that moment, and I can still see every instant of that moment, how connected we had become. And that, I guess that was in 1999 or 1998 when that happened. But that was 9 years after we met. So it's just this unfolding of our relationship that I find amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It is amazing.
The other nice thing about our relationship is that we're also very good. We spend a lot of time together, but we're also very good at giving ourselves space. And we can read each other reasonably well to know that, Don needs to be left alone, or Doug needs to be left alone. And I remember when my mother died, which was suddenly and unexpectedly, and was very distressing and upsetting. But for about 2 months afterwards, I would go up to the upper terrace and sit there by myself. And Don did the right thing by just leaving me alone for 2 months. And it was very difficult for him because I think that he probably felt a little, not ignored, but as if I was being very distant. And we can tell when each other's distant from the other. All of a sudden we start feeling bad because we aren't connected the way we should be. But for 2 to 3 months, he was able to give me that space and deal with that distance while I slowly came to terms with the death of my mother. So I think for us, that's been a very important part of our relationship too, besides the connection, is the ability to give each other the distance when we need it.
What was in Don that you found so attractive that you, because he's HIV positive, but then you wanted to be with him despite the medical condition. So what was in him that you saw that made you want to spend time?
Well, first he has beautiful blue eyes, and he's good looking. And because I was involved with this group called Safe Company and working with the AIDS Action Committee, Don was not the first man that I had dated who was HIV positive, and I felt like it's better to know the situation than to not know. And so for me, it really wasn't an issue. It was an issue also. I mean, it was always on our mind, but it never got in the way of me wanting to spend my life with him. And if it was for a shorter time because he would have died from HIV, I still would have wanted to spend that time with him because I enjoyed him. And I figured better to have 3 or 5 years of someone wonderful than nothing, or someone who's not very interesting.
It's been, what, 15 years?
15 years.
15 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We went through a period of time from, I guess, about 1994 or 5, when his health was declining, and it seemed like every January some new problem would happen. And but then the AIDS drugs came along, and Don responded really well, and we've been very lucky to be able to make it to 15 years. One of the worst things that's happened to us that I think actually strengthens our relationship is that I actually zero-converted.
Zero.
I became HIV positive and infected by Don, which was the one thing that we didn't want to happen. And it happened, and it took a while for us to recover from that. But we're both doing well, and